Commissioned by none other than George Washington. The original wooden tower of Seguin Island Lighthouse was built in 1795 off the southern coast of Georgetown, Maine. That tower was removed and replaced with a stone structure in 1819. It was rebuilt once more with cut stones in 1857, and it's that version of the lighthouse that stands to this day. The haunting of the lighthouse stems from a story of a keeper and his wife from sometime in the mid-19th century. Isolated from the population, the keeper had a piano delivered to alleviate the couple's loneliness. Unfortunately, his wife was only able to play a single song, and she played it over and over again. Eventually, this drove the keeper to take an axe to the piano, then to his wife, and then to himself. To this day, people visiting the picturesque lighthouse claim to hear the ghostly melody the keeper's wife played so long ago. Others have spoken of a young girl's ghost who runs around laughing and waving at them. Members of the US Coast Guard have spoken of ghostly sounds, furniture being moved about, and items going missing. Another story stems from the dismantling of the light in 1985 by the US Coast Guard. A warrant officer was awakened one night by a ghostly apparition dressed in oilskins who was shaking his bed. The figure said,
"Don't take the furniture, please. Leave my home alone."
The very next day, the ship that was carrying the furniture sank. Some believe the keeper's ghost was trying to keep his furniture as close to his home as possible. Passing sailors claim to hear piano music playing across the water on still nights. There's a young girl who is buried on the island who can be heard laughing and calling out to visitors, or running up the lighthouse steps. There's a former keeper who is so vexed when current residents move furniture that he always returns it to the original position. One visitor to the lighthouse said, "There have been a few suspicious incidents since we arrived on the island. Once, whilst alone in the keeper's quarters, I was somehow locked in the basement. What makes it even more odd is that door has a hook and eye latch, and we have no explanation as to how it happened. Twice, we heard a female voice distinctly call out, 'Hello.' Thinking other guests were arriving, we pulled on our boots and ran outside, only to find the yard vacant." There are plenty of rational explanations for these occurrences, of course. It's a drafty house, and doors blow shut all the time. Maybe we just heard a seagull cry and mistook it for a woman's voice. We try not to jump to conclusions, but there is always one last question. Its wording betrays the beliefs of the guests. But you do believe in ghosts, right? I think anyone who asks this question is missing the point. The real question to ask is, do ghosts believe in us? Avon's Haunted Bridge. Maybe you hear the moans of a construction worker trapped forever inside the arches of Avon's Haunted Bridge after he slipped and fell into wet concrete. Or perhaps it's the ghostly cries of a woman mourning the sick baby who tumbled from her arms down into the water of White Lick Creek. The stories are nearly as old as the 115-year-old Gothic bridge that towers over County Road 625 East, just south of US 36. The bridge and its folklore are intertwined with the lives of people who live in this part of Hendricks County. Harriet Muston heard them all from her husband, Charlie, whose ancestors settled in the area during the 1830s. She said Charlie's aunt, Ruth Barker, fed the workers as they constructed the bridge. There's a big white house, and that's where they lived, and I can remember my mother-in-law saying that her parents would be so mad because the kids would all get out and play on the railroad tracks, Muston said. And the mother, of course, didn't like it. The bridge, with its uniquely haunting appearance, has been a magnet for residents, particularly teenagers, for generations. The road was all gravel, and there weren't all the nearby housing additions back then, so it was far spookier than it is now, said Joseph Neal, who grew up in Plainfield during the 1980s and 90s. Those arches along the bridge almost looked like eyes. Construction on the bridge took place in 1906 and 1907 for the Big Four Railroad, the more common name for the Cleveland, Cincinnati, Chicago and St. Louis Railway. The Indianapolis News on June 27, 1907, reported the 305-foot long bridge has 3 arches of 75 feet each, and on top of these are 24 arches of 7 feet and 4 inches. The approximate cost was $70,000. Trains crossing through Hendricks County today carry freight and industrial materials along lines owned by CSX, but they originally took passengers to and from Union Station in Indianapolis. The bridge was double-tracked in 1908, the same year the Friday Caller, a newspaper in Plainfield, published a story on some of the earliest reports of spirits in the area. 2 or 3 men have been killed in accidents at the Big Four Bridge over Big Creek, and now the bridge is alleged to be haunted. Reputable men say that sounds of a great wave falling into the water underneath is sometimes heard, but the water remains perfectly calm, with no sign of having been disturbed. J.W. Bunk Atherton, a well-known citizen, passed the bridge just after dark on election night, and he declares he saw some spirits hovering around the east end of the structure. Like all good folklore, there are multiple stories to explain the strange happenings. Susan Truax, a historian for the Avon Washington Township Public Library, said one involves a worker who fell into wet concrete and remained there when the foreman did not want to stop work. Some say a saw was left in the drying concrete and his screams can still be heard some nights. Another version of perhaps the same story involves a worker who was sawing a wooden beam that was too long. He was on a wooden framework above the centre support. The worker lost his balance and fell directly into the freshly poured concrete. The other workers could not save him, and signs of his fate include the end of his saw still protruding from the centre support, and the screaming that can be heard whenever a train passes over the bridge. A third story involves a woman hurrying over the bridge on the railroad track with her sick baby. She caught her foot on the track and dropped the baby, who subsequently died. Truax said another version of that story says the mother fell to her death in the creek as well. Whether or not the bridge is really haunted by the poor souls of those who died here remains a topic of speculation among locals. But what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. St. Augustine's famous lighthouse has long been a destination for ghost hunters. The tower's construction began in 1871 and was completed in 1874. The superintendent in charge of construction, Hezekiah H. Pittee, had 4 children who were involved in a terrible accident. In the summer of 1873, the 4 children and the 10-year-old African-American girl were playing on a supply cart when it ran into a gate and was trapped in the water. By the time a worker could get them out, the 2 oldest children, Eliza and Mary, had lost their lives. The fate of the 10-year-old girl was never recorded. Additionally, a keeper met his tragic end whilst whitewashing the exterior of the original Augustine lighthouse, also known as the Old Spanish Watchtower, in December 1859. Whilst working more than 60 feet in the air, the scaffolding failed and collapsed underneath the keeper's feet. The keeper and both children are said to haunt the current lighthouse to this day. Visitors to the tower have noticed the presence of various shadowy figures, a hand reaching through the tower door, and furniture that moves about on its own. After being darkened during the Civil War on June 1, 1867, The old Spanish watchtower once more became a functioning lighthouse with the return of its light. Nevertheless, it soon became clear that the structure would soon lose the battle with Mother Nature as the sea continued to erode the land around the lighthouse. After several reports to the United States Lighthouse Board referencing the erosion and the encroaching seas, Congress approved the money for a new St. Augustine Lighthouse Tower. The construction of the tower began in 1871, but what was supposed to be a benefit to public transportation and safety soon turned to tragedy. Superintendent of lighthouse construction, Hezekiah Pittee, moved from Cape Elizabeth, Maine, with his family to oversee the construction of the new St. Augustine Lighthouse. Hezekiah lived on site with his wife Mary and their children, Mary Adelaide, Eliza, Edward, and Carrie. Just as any child would do, the Pittee children turned the construction site into a playground, inviting the children of the workers to join in their fun and games. By 1873, only the foundation and 42 feet of the 165-foot tower were completed. A railway cart moved the supplies from supply ships docked at Salt Run to the building site. Riding the cart down to the water was a favourite pastime of the Pittee children. They used the cart as a Victorian-era roller coaster, riding the cart to the water and bringing it back up to the site to ride again. Only a wooden board at the end of the rail stopped the cart from tipping over into the water. On July 10, 1873, the three Pittee sisters, Mary, 15, Eliza, 13, and Carrie, 4, along with an unknown African-American girl, 10, whose father may have worked on the site, were riding the cart as normal. The wooden board that stopped the cart from going into the water was not in place. The cart carrying the girls flipped into the water, trapping the girls underneath. Mr. Dan Sessions, a young African-American worker, witnessed the tragic event and raced to the water. When he reached the cart, using all of his strength, he lifted it from atop the girls. By this time, unfortunately, 3 of the 4 girls had drowned. The only survivor was the youngest, Carrie. In the days following the accident, the construction site, as well as the town, shut down for the funeral of the girls. Following the funeral, the Pittee family returned to Maine to lay their daughters to rest in their hometown. Staff researchers have not yet been able to find the final resting place of the young African-American girl. In the 145 years since the accident, strange occurrences have been repeatedly attributed to the spirits of the girls. One story often told involves a relief lighthouse keeper living in the home in the 1950s who reported hearing footsteps upstairs. He went to investigate, but nobody was up there. The head keeper at the time was James Pippin. He served from 1953 to 1955 and was the last keeper to live at the light station. Pippin initially lived in the keeper's house, as all the previous keepers had done, but he moved to the much smaller 1941 Coastal Lookout building, swearing the big house was haunted and he would not stay another night in that house. In 1955, the lighthouse lamp was fully automated, and the United States Coast Guard replaced lighthouse keepers with a position called lamplighter. The local lamplighter had all the duties of a lightkeeper, but did not live on site. As a result, the keeper's house was rented for a time. A local man who crafted leather goods rented the property during the 1960s. He tells the story of waking up one night with a small girl standing by his bed. As he blinked his eyes to look at her, she disappeared. In 1970, after standing empty for many years, the keeper's house burned under mysterious circumstances, gutting the home, leaving only the coquina basement and a few charred timbers. St. Johns County purchased the shell of the building with the intention of demolishing it for safety reasons. However, 16 women in the all-volunteer Junior Service League of St. Augustine stepped in, raising $1.2 million over the next 15 years to restore and renovate the Keeper's house, Lighthouse Tower, and the original Fresnel lens, a feat never before accomplished. The group added the building to the National Register of Historic Places with the help of Karen Harvey, a local historian, writer, and long-time lighthouse advocate. During the renovation, both construction workers and the JSL volunteers reported numerous unexplained incidents in the home. The basement was a particularly active area for ghostly encounters, being the only part of the home that had not completely burned. Perhaps the children like to play here. You can still feel a spooky presence in this area to this day. While the children are by no means the only tragedy that occurred in the home, the girls are some of the most active spirits around. As playful spirits, the girls enjoy playing hide and seek, sometimes including unsuspecting people. One night, in the dark Lighthouse Tower, a lone staff member was closing up for the night. He heard giggling at the top of the tower. Thinking that he had left someone on top of the tower, he returned to the top to find it completely empty. As he began to head back down the tower, he heard the same giggles, but this time coming from below him. Descending the stairs, he once again found absolutely nobody there. Was it just the wind? Or was he in the midst of a game of hide and seek? One evening, whilst on a ghost tour, a female guest was standing on the first step of the metal lighthouse staircase. When she took her first step to climb the tower, she found her shoelace had been tied to the staircase. Whether it was a ghost or her companion playing a trick, we cannot say. The girls sometimes appear to people in fully formed apparitions. Several years ago, during the day, a guest was exploring the maritime hammock trails and came upon a young girl in a Victorian outfit, sitting on a bench reading a book. As she began to ask the girl a question, another group came up from the opposite direction. Distracted by the group, the woman looked away for only a second and turned back to find the little girl on the bench had completely disappeared. In a similar instance, a woman on a ghost tour approached another woman to compliment her daughter's behaviour on the tour. Confused, the woman said she had no daughter. The other woman then told her that a little girl had been standing by her side most of the evening. There were no children on the tour that evening. If you ever decide to visit the tower, perhaps you too will join the Pity Girls for a round of hide and seek. The Headless Horseman of Lakey's Creek is quite possibly one of the oldest ghost stories in Illinois. Passed down as an oral tradition until John W. Allen put the story on paper in 1963, the mysterious man named Lakey, as well as his untimely end, has been immortalized in the folklore of southern Illinois. Like Lake Michigan's Seaweed Charlie, this ghost story may be preserving the memory of an unsettling event in local history. Long before a concrete bridge spanned the shallow creek 1.5 miles east of McLeansboro, a frontiersman named Lakey attempted to erect his log cabin near a ford along the wagon trail to Mount Vernon. One morning, a lone traveller stumbled upon Lakey's body. Lakey's head had been severed by his own axe, which was left at the scene. According to legend, his murderer was never found. For decades after the murder, travellers reported being chased by a headless horseman who rode out of the woods along Lakey's Creek. Always the rider, on a large black horse, joined travellers approaching the stream from the east, and always on the downstream side, John Allen wrote. Each time, and just before reaching the centre of the creek, the mist-like figure would turn downstream and disappear. In the October 1973 issue of Goshen Trails, Ralph S. Harrelson published research in which he claimed to have learned the historical personage behind the Lakey legend. In A History of Hamilton County, he discovered a single sentence revealing that a man named Lakey, the same man who gave his name to the creek, had indeed lived near the ford, but more tellingly, that he had been murdered by his son-in-law. After further research, Harrelson discovered that a man named Joel Leakey had owned a tract of land in that vicinity prior to 1824. Leakey apparently was a variation in the spelling of Lakey. Joel could be, and probably is, the person for who the creek is named, he concluded. The tale of the Headless Horseman of southern Illinois has graced the pages of many monographs on Illinois ghost lore since its first printing in 1963. Among others, Lakey's ghost has appeared in Beth Scott and Michael Norman's Haunted Heartland in 1985, Joe Ann Christensen's Ghost Stories of Illinois in 2000, and Chad Lewis and Terry Fisk's Illinois Road Guide to Haunted Locations in 2007. Only Chad Lewis and Terry Fisk's work contains a contemporary encounter with the Phantom. A local woman who was familiar with the Lakey legend told them about the incident. The woman passed over the bridge every day on her way to and from work. One evening, she saw something strange in the woods. As the woman slowed down to get a better look at what she had seen, she almost crashed her car because of what was staring back at her, Lewis and Fisk related. Perched on top of a large horse was a man with no head. We will never know if Washington Irving's famous tale of the legend of Sleepy Hollow affected the legend of Lakey's Creek. It is possible that German settlers carried the tale from New England to southern Illinois. Stories involving ghostly chases, such as Gottfried Berger's The Wild Huntsman, were widely popular in the early 1800s. Then again, Lakey's Black Steed could have been sighted right here in Illinois. The Block Island Southeast Lighthouse is New England's highest lighthouse, sitting at 258 feet above sea level. The lighthouse, in its Gothic-type architecture, was known as one of the grandest in the nation, built during Block Island's time as a major resort. The former murdered wife of the lighthouse keeper is believed to haunt the lighthouse as an angry poltergeist, even after the lighthouse was moved back away from the eroding cliffs in 1993. In the early 1990s, a keeper's wife died under mysterious circumstances. The story goes that the keeper had a violent argument with his supposedly nagging wife, who was bored and depressed in the lighthouse. It's said that in a fit of anger, he pushed her down the tower stairs, causing her death. She was found with a broken neck at the foot of the stairs. She and her husband being known to have a remarkably contentious marriage. It was immediately, despite all insistences that she had in a fit of temper or despair thrown herself down the stairs, relieved of his duties, arrested, charged with murder, convicted and sent to prison, never returning to the lighthouse. His wife, understandably, never left. Even since 1993, after the lighthouse was moved, men have reported seeing the ghost of a woman rushing up and down the stairs in a rage, rearranging furniture, and has reportedly been observed throwing food at those men who have visited her kitchen. Women and children, however, seem to be left alone. Women staying in the lighthouse have reported no such disturbances from this supposedly vengeful spirit. Her spite was directed strictly at men. They call the spirit Mad Maggie, and she is one pissed off lady. As long as there were lighthouse keepers and their families stationed at the lighthouse, Maggie was active. She occasionally would do gentler things such as rearranging the furniture, possibly a source of contention with her husband. She would stomp up and down the stairs where she died in the middle of the night. She would even throw food if men ate in her kitchen. If a lightkeeper happened to be sleeping alone in one of the house's beds, she would shake him awake. She would cause the bed to lift clear off the floor, shaking the bed violently, only to settle it back down with a loud bang. She also had a tendency to lock men into empty rooms or closets, which begs the question, Did her husband ever lock her up in a similar way? Guests at the lighthouse have witnessed closet doors opening and slamming shut. Some have even reported that sharp objects, including knives, have been thrown at them. Many have witnessed this poltergeist banging pots and pans, seemingly not caring if anyone was watching her. Her most spectacular feat, however, seems to have been the night she locked the keeper out of the house altogether. The man was single and sleeping alone when Maggie began harassing him that night. He had finally had enough and went racing outside in his underwear, only to find, when he tried to go back into his bed, that the door had been locked behind him from the inside. He was finally able to get into another building on the site, so the story goes, and had to call the Coast Guard to come and unlock the lighthouse so he could get back inside. Two things come to mind. He doubtless left shortly thereafter. And thank the Lord, he was most likely wearing night clothes that evening. On the side of Bowcatcher Mountain, an arched stone bridge stands vine-covered and shrouded in trees. Helen's Bridge is like a sentinel overlooking downtown Nashville, spanning past and present just as much as the road below. While many are drawn to the majestic beauty of Helen's Bridge, others want to see the ghost of the woman legend says haunts it. The bridge was built in 1909 as a carriageway for the Zeelandia estate, and was originally known as Zeelandia's Bridge. That much is known. Some years later, the rugged structure became known as Helen's Bridge, named after the ghost that legend says haunts it. There are several versions of the story of how Helen's spirit came to be at the bridge, but the most consistent one is that Helen's daughter tragically died in a fire almost 100 years ago. Grief-stricken, Helen tied a noose around her neck and flung herself from the bridge. According to most reports, Helen's ghost is not threatening. She just seems as tortured now as she was after the death of her daughter. Some claim to see Helen's lifeless body hanging from the bridge. Others see her beside the bridge, frantically searching for her daughter. Others have said they have seen her standing in the road, looking forlorn and lost. Numerous mechanical problems have also been attributed to Helen's ghost. Many people have said their vehicles would not start when they tried to leave. Others have reported problems with camera and cell phone batteries. Why not pay a trip to Helen's Bridge if you're ever in the area? You might just witness the apparition of her hanging body for yourself. Located mere meters away from the cold waters of the Pacific Ocean, atop the steep, unforgiving California cliffsides, sits a historical lighthouse by the name of Battery Point. Located mere meters away from the cold waters, Battery Point Lighthouse, also known locally as the Beacon of Northern California, has sat on the rocky coast side of Crescent City, California since 1856. The first lighting of the original oil lights was December 10th of that year. But it wasn't until Christmas Day that the lighthouse had its first keeper, Theophilus Magruder. Magruder held the position of keeper for 3 years. His annual salary was $1,000. The state of California issued a pay cut to a few different lighthouses including Battery Point in 1859. Following that pay cut, Magruder stepped down from the position but stayed in Crescent City until his death in 1886. Reportedly, his time there was fairly uneventful. For 15 years, the lighthouse sat nearly empty. There were locals that would upkeep the light, but no true keeper stayed on the property. Charles Edwards, 1860. Dougald S. Sartwell, 1860 to 1862. George Washington Emery, 1862 to 1866. John Hennessy, 1866 to 1875, were the helpers through the years. The waves and winds of the vast ocean swept much of the new building feeling away, thus bringing along the lonely feeling of abandonment to the lighthouse. The exterior walls were mostly wooden, as well as the inside walls and flooring of the second level. The water damage the lighthouse had suffered was immense. Even the road leading up to the lighthouse disappeared in high tide for most of the day, making the property even harder to reach. St George Reef sat a little over 6 miles northwest of the Battery Point harbour. They erected a similar lighthouse on the reef in 1892, though many sailors still felt it didn't light up the waters enough for safe passage, opting to stay overnight in the bay before trying to dock in the morning. The harbours in Crescent City experienced only one fatal shipwreck before the state decided to find a permanent keeper to relight Battery Point's lighthouse. The second permanent keeper of Battery Point, John Jeffrey, started in 1875. He, along with his wife and 4 children, lived on the grounds of the lighthouse. Jeffrey tried slowly to fix up what he could of the nearly 20-year-old lighthouse. Their lives were as peaceful as could be on the little isle for about 4 years. Tragically, in 1879, a massive wave struck the kitchen, which had been built onto the west wing of the building. The chimney had collapsed and the connecting stove toppled through the floor, starting a fire inside the hut. The family all frantically drew water from the well to attempt to put the flames out, only to have the fire snuffed by a second enormous wave. Thankfully, none of the family had been hurt. This wasn't the last, or even the most devastating storm to hit Crescent City. The worst seen by the coastal town was the tsunami of 1964. The earthquake that caused the massive wave hit Alaska near Prince William Sound. The shockwave caused waves to flood the city with 600-mile-an-hour bursts of thousands of gallons of water. It was reported to have taken the lives of 11 men, women and children and destroyed over 25 blocks of the city. Amazingly, the lighthouse stood strong through the chaos. The keepers, Clarence and Peggy Coons, had the only front row seats to the carnage. Their lives after were haunted by more than just memories of the horrific event. The tsunami devastated the town and its inhabitants. The wreckage that was swept out to sea, brimming with personal belongings from over 250 homes. After the water retreated, the families of Crescent City began to rebuild. To the human lives lost, they were never truly removed from the sea. The following years is when the Coons began to witness the souls of the lost find their way towards the beacon of Battery Point. No one knows the names of the spirits that have found themselves in and around the property. Peggy Coons was the first reported to hear the wet footsteps coming up from the dark rocks below the lighthouse. When she went to help the person she believed was there was only the wind. From then on, not many keepers stayed long due to the weird phenomenon that occurred there. Some have said that the longest lasting keeper, John Jeffrey, is the man behind the loud boot steps you can hear climbing the stairs to the light. Local legend aside, it would make sense that the keeper of 40 years may still be doing his duties after his passing. He was the only recorded death on Battery Point Lighthouse's grounds. Though his death was not violent or even sudden, his soul may be so connected to the responsibilities he held in life that he had decided to stick around. His passing, though, does not explain the little child's laughter sometimes heard in the main areas of the living quarters. Today, the lighthouse still holds silent beauty over the Crescent City coast. Its light still shines bright for all ships and land-bound visitors within 14 miles of the island. The owners now offer historical tours along with a few nightly ghost hunts, although I would recommend going on a dry day, just in case the waves raise the spirits of those who never made it home. What's the basis of folklore? Is it merely the musings of a bored and creative mind? Or are there ripples of truth tucked away in otherwise fantastical tales, allowing the story to both exist in our reality and that which sits beyond the veil? It's a question to ponder as you approach the ominous bridge crossing over the gentle waters of the Medina River. Monkey Lady Bridge may be a conduit for spectral energy, the river serving as the perfect manifestation point for an unsettling legend that exists just outside San Antonio's suburbs. The horrific Donkey Lady of San Antonio claims this stretch of road, or so the urban legend goes. In the shadows of foliage and brush, the disfigured entity lies in wait for hapless drivers, possibly in search of revenge for the horrific acts that were set upon herself and her family. Passers-by and curious locals have tested the merits of the Donkey Lady Bridge legend, some having walked away spouting only warnings for others with the same inclination to cause mischief at the Feral Spirits Bridge. The Donkey Lady story has several iterations, though they all have the same tragic ending. A melted figure rushes from a burning home, jumps into the cooling river waters, and vanishes forever. Where and when this gruesome tale occurs varies, though the consensus is sometime during the 1800s or the 1950s. The details leading up to the perilous death of the so-called Donkey Lady are also up for debate, though they all unravel in the same location. Anyone brave enough to park their car on the bridge, turn off the lights, and wait in silence may just come face to face with the grisly phantom. The two most popular versions of the lore of the Donkey Lady always starts with a farmer, a wife, and their two children. In one version, the father snaps and turns on his family in a moment reminiscent of the Amityville horror. He kills the children outright, possibly refusing to subject them to the same brutal end their mother was about to meet. Rather than spare his wife though, the farmer sets his home ablaze, trapping his beloved inside. Wails echo from the rising inferno as the heat takes its toll on the woman's body. Her skin begins to melt the longer she stays in the farmhouse, the flesh of her fingers fusing together like candle wax. Her skin chars and recedes around her skeleton, giving her face an elongated look. Before death can take her, the woman breaks free from the inferno and rushes to the nearby Medina River. Her body was never found. It's believed the Donkey Lady is the charred woman returning, hoping to find her husband and exact her revenge. Another popular version sees the same family in their farmhouse, but it's not the father who kills his family and sets the creation of the Donkey Lady in motion. While the family is minding their business on the outskirts of civilization, a stranger comes to their farm and becomes sidetracked by their animals. Believed to come from money, the stranger torments one of the farmer's animals, either a horse or a mule. Bothered by the man's presence and actions, the animal bites him, inciting rage from the stranger. As he beats the poor beast, the farmer and his family rush out to protect the livestock. Though they chase the villain away with stones, it's not long before he returns. The affluent man returns in the cover of night. He's joined by a posse of vandals who intend to help settle the score. With the family asleep inside, the party sets the farmhouse on fire. In this version, the farmer tries to distract the men, hoping to give his family a chance to escape. He's gunned down instantly, and his children succumb to the blaze. His wife is doomed to become the horrifying fiend that would, years later, spur tales of a Donkey Lady haunting the bridge on Old Applewhite Road. There's a third version that sees the wife and her domesticated donkey drowned in the river together, their souls merging into one malformation that terrorizes anyone who comes close to their final resting place. Though a nightmarish sight, the Donkey Lady doesn't appear to be dangerous. At least, nobody has gotten close enough to warrant being attacked by the spectre. Rambunctious teens and brave ghost hunters have tested the limits of the Donkey Lady. None ever walk away with a marking to suggest that the protector of the bridge is even capable of physical interaction with the living. The powerful energy generated by her painful death and loss of her family allows her to remain a supernatural fixture of San Antonio. There are many haunts that stalk the centuries-old city, from residuals simply retelling their story to intelligent haunts protecting a piece of their past. Sometimes also referred to as the Gurnet Light. Plymouth Bay Lighthouse was constructed in 1768 to guide mariners travelling through Plymouth Bay Harbour. The original structure of the Plymouth Bay Lighthouse in Massachusetts consisted of two towers fueled by oil lamps. After the original wooden lighthouse structure caught fire, it was rebuilt in 1803 as a single, taller tower. It was rebuilt again in 1843 when the wooden frame became too deteriorated due to weather exposure. It was once home to the first female lighthouse keeper in America, Hannah Thomas, at some point between 1776 and 1778. Hannah inherited the duties of keeper from her husband after he was slain in combat during the American Revolution. Some believe Hannah haunts her lighthouse to this day, even though the original structure no longer stands. Apparently, Hannah doesn't mind the new digs, as she's been spotted by several people in the new structure. A professional photographer and his wife claim to have encountered Hannah while they were staying at the house adjacent to the tower. Awakened in the middle of the night, the couple saw the upper half of a ghostly woman floating over their bed, staring down at them. The spirit was wearing 18th century period clothing and had long, dark, flowing hair. The lighthouse is also said to be haunted by the spirit of a young girl called Eunice, who has been spotted on occasions by visitors to the tower. Joseph, Uncle Joe Burgess, son of former keeper Nathaniel, took over on October 16, 1812, and remained in charge until 1851. According to an 1896 article, Uncle Joe faced a tragedy at the station. When his 16-year-old daughter, Eunice, fell in love with a soldier at the nearby fort, Burgess refused permission for her to wed. The depressed girl leapt to her death near the light from a great rock, known afterwards as Lover's Rock. The story of the Bunnyman of Fairfax County in Northern Virginia is one that has been haunting locals for many years. There is a few different variations and tales, but I'll try to bring you what I've read that seems to be the most common of these tales. Sometime around 1904, a bus transporting prisoners from an asylum crashed, and all of the inmates escaped. Every last one. The police were able to capture all but two of them. They were named Marcus Wolster and Douglas Grifton. During the hunt for the two men, the police found the half-eaten bodies of nearly a dozen rabbits. Eventually, they found Marcus Wolster's body at a railway bridge. This bridge later became known as the Bunnyman Bridge. Wolster's body was cold and stiff, but the police noticed he was holding something in his hand with a tight grip. It was a hatchet. Another version of the story claims that Wolster's body was found hacked up by a hatchet, most likely wielded by fellow escapee Douglas Grifton, who went on to live in the nearby woods as the Bunnyman. About a year or so later, a couple of teens were driving with their girlfriends looking to scare them. They decided to go out to the old railroad bridge where the Bunnyman was killed. It was almost midnight. The boys stopped under the bridge and dragged the scare girls out of the car, teasing them that the ghost of the Bunnyman would get them. The teasing became too much for one of the girls, who pushed the boys away and ran out from under the bridge into the road. At that moment, at the exact stroke of midnight, she saw a bright flash of light under the bridge. When the light faded, she saw her friends' bodies mutilated and hanging from the bridge, and their car had a bloody axe stuck into the windshield. Ever since that night, local kids gather every Halloween at Bunnyman Bridge, but they all scatter before midnight, as none want to be caught under the bridge when the Bunnyman comes. In 2018, a man's body was found near the bridge. A police officer stated, "He was found along the 6500 block of Colchester Road in Fairfax Station by a nearby resident just before 7 a.m. Hooker's body was about 900 feet from what's known as the Bunnyman Bridge. The railroad bridge is part of an urban legend, which draws hordes of teenagers to the rural area of Fairfax County every Halloween. And certainly it's ironic the man's body pops up near the Bunnyman Bridge. One Redditor even said that as far as he knows, the police still block off access to the Bunnyman Bridge on Halloween. Years later, in 1970, a young couple parked outside a family member's house one night very close to the Bunnyman Bridge. They claimed to see something moving in the rearview mirror. Before they could get out of the car, there was a loud smash as a wooden-handled hatchet came flying through the glass, and a man standing outside the car started shouting at them that they were on private property. Luckily, neither the man or woman were hurt, and they floored it out of there and went straight to the police. Upon investigation, a hatchet was later found in the car. The couple said the man looked to be wearing a white outfit with what looked like a hood or bunny ears. Just a few weeks later, right before Halloween, only a few blocks away, a construction security guard was out on patrol. He came upon a man wearing what he described as a grey or white bunny suit on a front porch. The man in the bunny suit told the security guard he was trespassing and that if he came any closer, he'd hack off the security guard's head. He then pulled out a hatchet and began chopping away at the wooden post on the porch. The security guard ran to get a weapon, but the man was gone when he got back. Sometime after this sighting, the construction company working in the area got a call from someone claiming to be the Bunnyman. He said that if they did not stop leaving trash and materials on his land, he was going to visit them personally and hack them up. The police were called, but the man or entity was never found. This story came from another Redditor. I lived in Fairfax as a kid in the 90s. One fall afternoon, I was walking home from school when I passed someone walking down the street in a Bunnyman suit. I would like to say the story ended there, but it didn't. I kept noticing out of the corner of my eyes that they were behind me. When I would turn around, they were just standing there perfectly still, staring straight at me. I eventually realised they were following me, so I ran the rest of the way home and locked the apartment door. I never saw the person again, thank God. I don't know if it was a person in a suit just trying to copy the popular legend, or if it was the ghost of the Bunnyman that people talk about. Either way, I was scared shitless. To this day, people in Fairfax all over the area still talk about the Bunnyman. Some believe it's just a legend, others a cryptid. Some believe the Bunnyman to be the malevolent ghost of Marcus Walster. The Fairport Harbour Lighthouse was first built in 1825. In 1871, the lighthouse was in need of repairs, as the tower and the house quickly needed to be rebuilt. The lighthouse and keeper's house that you see today was in use until 1925. When a new lighthouse was erected close to the old one, the locals abandoned the Fairport gem. Sandstone was used to build the lighthouse that stands 70 feet in the air. It's no longer operational, but that doesn't stop enthusiasts from exploring its haunted past. Throughout the history of Fairport Harbour Lighthouse, there were two prominent lighthouse keepers to note. Samuel Butler was the first keeper of the lighthouse and was also an active abolitionist. His interests made the lighthouse a northern terminal of the Underground Railroad and was successful in helping runaway slaves find safety in Canada. Many believe that this piece of history contributes to the haunted past of the lighthouse. Another theory of paranormal activity cited at the lighthouse is associated with the second lighthouse keeper, who was very much attached to the structure. He loved his job and could have possibly refused to leave his post, even after death. Captain Joseph Babcock was the first keeper of the reconstructed lighthouse and keeper's dwelling. He also raised a family on the lighthouse grounds. Two of his children were born in the home, but he unfortunately lost one of his children, Robbie, to smallpox at the age of 5. Obviously, losing a child at such a young age was very difficult, and the family deeply felt the effects. Things took a turn for the worst when the lady of the house had fallen ill and had to stay in her bed inside of the house. To keep herself entertained, she kept lots of cats. The significance of Mrs. Babcock's pets is that some people claim to have spotted the ghost of a cat moving quickly up the stairs. Some describe the feline as travelling in a grey puff of smoke. To add a twist to the ghostly cat account, the body of a mummified cat had been discovered by one of the workers on the lighthouse grounds. It is actually on display in a glass cabinet at the Fairport Harbour Museum. Today, the keeper's house is being used as the Fairport Marine Museum, making it the first lighthouse grounds to be restored into a museum in the United States. This transformation took place in 1945. It's here that people come to view a variety of nautical and historic exhibits significant to the local region. Other ghosts thought to haunt the premises include the spirit of Mrs. Babcock herself and the spirit of the first lighthouse keeper. On the outskirts of Meridian, in rural Lauderdale County, an old truss bridge spans the Chunky River, a tributary of the Chickasawhay River. Designated a Mississippi landmark and listed on the National Register of Historic Places, the bridge has long been closed to vehicles. Yet many a visitor still ventures out onto Stuckey's Bridge in search of the ghost of Old Man Stuckey. Legend has it that the infamous train-robbing Dalton gang passed through Meridian in the late 1800s, leaving behind a member of their group. Stuckey made his way down the old dirt stage road along the Chunky River and established an inn beside its banks. At dusk, he would cross the bridge with his lantern and call out to exhausted travellers floating on the river to stop for the night for a hot meal and comfortable bed. Once the guests had drifted off to sleep, however, Stuckey would murder them in their beds, stealing their belongings and burying their bodies at the river's edge. Stuckey killed more than 20 victims before he was caught by the local sheriff, tried and hung from the bridge. His body swung for 5 days over the Chunky River before the noose was cut and he was dropped into the water. The original bridge from Stuckey's days was replaced in 1901 by the current truss bridge, but the replacement apparently didn't deter Stuckey from hanging around. Visitors have reported peculiar sights at the bridge, from an old man carrying a lantern at the water's edge to the sound of Stuckey's lifeless corpse splashing into the water flowing below. Some have seen Stuckey's body swaying in the wind. Some even claim to have seen Stuckey's body swaying in the wind, and others claim that Stuckey's angry ghost pushed them off the bridge. So, if you dare, next time you're near Meridian, take a short detour off the I-59 and visit Stuckey's Bridge, which the Travel Channel labels as one of the most terrifying places in America. Maine has a lot of lighthouses and a lot of ghost stories. So, it only makes sense that one of the best ghost stories to come from the state of Maine takes place at a lighthouse. Supposedly, one of the most haunted places in the state is the Owl's Head Lighthouse. After the project got approval by President John Quincy Adams, the lighthouse, which is located near Rockland, was built in 1824. According to lighthouse friends, the Owl's Head Lighthouse is haunted by 2 notable spirits. The first is believed to be the spirit of one of the lighthouse's long-deceased keepers. According to Bill O. Thompson, a lighthouse historian, for decades there have been reports of footprints leading up the ramp and stairs leading to the lighthouse. These footprints were clearly made by a man's work boots. Thompson believes that because of the dedication of lighthouse keepers, it only makes sense that a keeper's sense of duty did not end with his passing away. Thompson says, the typical keeper who lived back in these times was a dedicated worker. He loved his lighthouse and didn't want anything to ever go wrong with it. Keepers knew that if anything fouled up the equipment or disturbed the light, a disaster could and often did occur, so they never wanted to leave their post. I think sometimes, when they died, their spirits stayed behind. One of the other well-known ghost stories from Owl's Head Lighthouse involves a friendly lighthouse keeper who had a friendship with the daughter of a Coast Guardsman who was stationed there. As the story goes, when Claire was 2 years old, she met her father at the top of the stairs in the middle of the night to tell her father, "Fog's rolling in. Time to put the foghorn on." According to her parents, she would have no knowledge of those terms at that age. She also frequently talked about seeing a man with a beard, even though they never had a guest in the house matching that description. Just who was it that little Claire had seen? Travellers to the old Alton Bridge, built in 1884 as a busy thoroughfare, have long reported frightening encounters and ghostly experiences with supernatural creatures that have made it a legendary spot for Texas ghost hunters and a topic for numerous books. According to the most circulated version, an African-American entrepreneur named Oscar Washburn and his family tended a farmstead goat herd near the bridge that was renowned for quality meat, milk, cheeses, and hides. When the popular businessman proudly hung a sign on the old Alton Bridge directing "This way to the Goatman," it infuriated local Ku Klux Klansmen who plotted violence. On a dark night in the late 1930s, a lynch mob of Kluxers stormed Washburn's shack and dragged the screaming goatman to their noose waiting on the bridge, tightened the rope around the begging Oscar's neck, then mercilessly flung him over the side. When the night riders stumbled down to the dark river's edge to confirm their murderous handiwork, they were shocked to find only an inexplicably empty noose dangling over the undisturbed waters. The panicked Klansmen frantically searched the area unsuccessfully before rushing to Washburn's shanty, setting it afire with the goatman's family shrieking inside, perhaps to bait a desperate rescue attempt by the vanished Oscar. Washburn was never seen again, they say, but a vengeful spirit has haunted the old Alton Bridge ever since. Local legend says if you knock on the steel bridge 3 times at night, or perhaps turn off your car lights and honk 3 times in summons, then you dare a visitation from the vengeful goatman that's preceded by the stench of decaying flesh. Numerous reports tell of unholy glowing eyes that burn red from the darkness, eerie glimpses of a large snarling, goat-headed man-beast stomping in the wooded shadows, or a frightening apparition of a maniacal satyr carrying the heads of goats or humans in his hands. The terrifying encounters and reported vanishings have been so frequent as to warrant numerous investigations by paranormal groups. But, like I said, there's more than one version that attempts an explanation for a century of recurring frights and sights encountered at the bridge. Some attribute the work of Satanists who opened a portal for a hell-spawn demon, while others say that the goatman's wife is eternally searching for her murdered children. There is also another variation that predates the bridge itself. In an account that may go back as far as the 1860s, Texas Troubles, some Copper Canyon cowboys lynched a Creole slave goat herder named Jack Kendall from a tall creekside tree near where the bridge now stands. But ineptitude separated the runaway slave's head from his body. The slavers then watched in horror as the headless body raised itself from the creekbed mud, animated by voodoo, and ripped off the head of a nearby goat to replace his own, still dangling in the noose. Regardless of which origin gets told, old-timers warn that knocking 3 times on the trusses of the bridge is an invitation to judgment, since the ghastly goatman only spirits away those with the bloodlines of clansmen or slave owners into the woods for his terrible revenge. Along one of the most pristine and picturesque stretches of the Californian coastline rests a notorious, yet grand, lighthouse. In 1889, the Point Sur Lighthouse was commissioned to be built as a way to protect ships entering the dangerous waters that surround it. Although the lighthouse was positioned strategically and had an incredibly bright light, it was unable to prevent a number of disasters that occurred in the area. At least a dozen shipwrecks, many of which saw great losses in life, transpired just in sight of the lighthouse. One of the worst disasters to happen under the watch of the Point Sur Lighthouse was the Los Angeles, which sank in 1894. This disaster sadly claimed the lives of 6 people on board, including women and children. Being a beacon surrounded by such terrible disasters has left the Point Sur Lighthouse tainted, and according to many, haunted. Considering the tragic history that has bestowed this lonely lighthouse, it's easy to see why many people believe it to be haunted. Many believe that the lost souls from the shipwrecks that occurred near the lighthouse have been guided to land by the bright lamp of the Point Sur Lighthouse. Lost and confused, some of them are thought to now have taken up residence within the buildings that scatter the lighthouse's island. The spirits thought to have wandered ashore to this lighthouse include multiple sailors, young children, and a man in a navy blue suit. This man has been sighted by countless guests walking through the visitor centre, while others have claimed to hear or capture recordings of a little girl's voice. In addition to these lost souls, the spirits of the families that once manned and run the lighthouse before automation are also rumoured to have remained after death. In fact, as many as 20 ghosts are claimed to haunt the Point Sur Lighthouse. One of the most common pieces of paranormal evidence that has been documented at the lighthouse is EVPs, electronic voice phenomena. In addition to this, people have sighted apparitions, experienced poltergeist activity, and sometimes the lighthouse beacon will move on its own. The Point Sur Lighthouse is an interesting landmark to visit, and stunning as far as views are concerned. The lighthouse can be viewed in passing, or the island it sits upon can be visited with a guided tour. When most people complain about Interstate 4 running just over 132 miles from Tampa to Daytona Beach, they're annoyed with traffic, the wrecks, and the somewhat confusing yet constant construction. But locals in the Sanford area are concerned by something entirely different. This is because of speculation that the area is haunted, and possibly even cursed. Commuters driving through the quarter-mile stretch of highway roughly halfway between Orlando and Daytona Beach leading into the St. Johns River Bridge over Lake Monroe have reported a sudden drop in phone reception, static on their stories and CB radios, and the occasional apparition, zigzagging balls of light, a phantom trucker, and a ghostly hitchhiker. And that specific area is infamous for car crashes and fatalities. In a 2007 report, WKMG Channel 6 reported the Florida Highway Patrol said nearly 440 crashes had been reported there between 1999 and 2006. Is it congestion, as state officials have suggested? Or is there something of a more sinister and supernatural nature at play on this haunted highway? Every day, thousands of unsuspecting drivers pass over a seemingly ordinary stretch of highway, known to locals as the I-4 Dead Zone. This quarter mile of road has earned a notorious reputation as one of the most haunted highways in all of America. The site, once a failed German immigrant colony, serves as the final resting place for settlers who perished during a devastating yellow fever outbreak in 1887. Legend has it that anyone who disturbs this hallowed ground faces dire consequences, including the developers who paved it over to construct the current bridge and road. It's believed that the area where the highway was created was once a gravesite that was desecrated during its construction. Let's discuss a bit of backstory surrounding the area. In the 1870s, real estate mogul Henry Sanford promoted the southern shore of Lake Monroe to incoming immigrants and aspiring citrus farmers. He sold 640 acres to a group of German immigrants who established St. Joseph's Catholic Colony. Before this, the area was untamed wilderness, home only to Florida's wildlife and a manually operated river ferry. Sanford, head of the Florida Land and Colonization Company, saw potential in the land. By 1886, a small railroad station was constructed, and the land was divided into 10-acre parcels for sale to farmers and investors. Among these settlers was a group of Catholic immigrants led by their priest, Father Felix Swember. A Central Florida historian notes that the colonization efforts quickly fizzled out after only 4 families moved to the area. St. Joseph's Catholic Colony never flourished, and in 1887 a yellow fever epidemic sealed the land's fate. The fever claimed 4 members of one family, and in a panic, the remaining colonists buried the bodies in the woods north of the railroad. Father Swember was summoned to perform the last rites, but succumbed to the fever himself shortly after arriving in Tampa. With his death, the exact locations of the grave sites were lost to history. Some believe that because these settlers never received their last rites, their souls could not rest, and they wandered the area, resentful of the living. This might explain the bizarre events associated with this stretch of highway today. As time passed, the story of the colony became local legend. Bad luck was believed to befall anyone who tampered with the grave sites. One farmer's house mysteriously burned down after he removed grave markers, and a drunk driver tragically struck a child after playing around the site. These inexplicable events earned the area the grim nickname Field of the Dead. When Florida began purchasing land to build a new highway, the field, including the grave sites, was sold to the state. Although the graves were supposed to be relocated, they were neglected and ultimately paved over, ignoring their sanctity. Soon after, a hurricane struck the area. In true Florida fashion, Hurricane Donna hit on September 10, 1960, devastating the region. The storm's path was eerily precise, seemingly targeting the gravesite along the I-4. Hurricane Donna's flooding disrupted highway construction for months, and was one of the worst storms to hit Central Florida in centuries. Adding to the mystery, the hurricane altered its course to follow I-4 through Central Florida, with the eye passing over the gravesite around midnight. Many locals believe the highway construction and the disturbance of the dead influenced Donna's path. In 2004, another hurricane, Charlie, followed Donna's route, passing over the gravesite just as construction resumed around the area. This marked the beginning of the eerie legacy of the I-4 dead zone. The I-4 highway stretches 132 miles through Florida, with the dead zone located between Daytona Beach and Orlando, near St. Johns River. Drivers and visitors to the I-4 dead zone report strange phenomena when passing through this specific stretch. Cell phones mysteriously pick up voices near the south end of the I-4 bridge in Seminole County. One witness claimed conversations would be interrupted by voices of the dead. The area is infamous for an unusually high number of fatal accidents. On the very day the interstate opened to traffic, a truck hauling frozen shrimp became the dead zone's first casualty, losing control and jackknifing directly above the gravesite. Frequent deadly accidents are believed to be caused by the restless spirits buried beneath the highway's cold concrete. Other unexplained occurrences include static on CB radios, cell phones turning off without warning, mysterious balls of light floating above the road, ghostly hitchhikers, phantom voices, and apparitions. What causes these strange events? Could it be the power of suggestion, or is something more sinister at play? Locals are convinced that these occurrences stem from the secrets buried just beneath the asphalt. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the story of the I-4 Dead Zone serves as a chilling reminder of the past, where history and legend converge in the most unexpected places. The Seashore Lighthouse was commissioned by the Michigan State Congress back in 1886. After 6 years of construction, the 79-foot tower was placed into operation. Ellen Patskin shared her own story of Seashore Lighthouse on americashauntedroadtrip.com, where she describes the place as one of the scariest places on Earth. Rather than asking about ghosts, my first question was, how do you pronounce the name of this place? The young lady behind the counter laughed. It's a question she gets a lot. The easiest way I know to pronounce it is Sis-Shore, she told me. After getting that cleared up, I explained that I was writing a book about haunted places in Michigan and wondered if she'd ever seen or heard anything unusual in the lighthouse. Not personally, she said. Although several guests and other staff members told her they'd heard music, like an old phonograph recording, playing in the lighthouse. She said that some people also report that electronic devices, like the digital camera I was carrying, stopped working. The batteries just seemed to die for no reason, she said. If you really want some good stories, it's my mum you should talk to, she went on. You can find her over at the Lightkeeper's quarters. I quickly found Linda, the volunteer I was seeking, sitting in what had probably been a formal dining room. She looked up from her book and greeted me with a warm smile. As soon as I explained the reason for my visit, Linda invited me to have a seat with her so she could tell me about Captain Joseph Willie Townsend, the lighthouse's primary ghostly resident. She described him as a bit of a prankster, but not a ghost she or any of the other staff members had ever been afraid of. He was originally from Bristol, England, she said. Captain Townsend lived here from 1901 until he died of consumption in one of the upstairs bedrooms in 1910. Consumption is an old-fashioned term used for tuberculosis. Because he died in winter when the ground was too frozen to dig a grave, the captain couldn't be buried straight away, and his body had to be stored in the basement for several months. Some of the paranormal investigators who have visited Seashore believe that might be why the captain's spirit remains trapped at the lighthouse. Linda had her own ideas. She told me that the hauntings didn't really start until a couple of original pieces of furniture were brought up from storage when the lighthouse was last restored in the 1990s. One of the pieces in question is the kitchen table. Linda explained, in England, you set a table correctly by putting the knife and spoon on the left and the forks on the right. It's the opposite of the way we set our tables here in the United States. The captain doesn't seem to like it when we set the table the American way. We always find the silverware reversed, even though no one's been in the kitchen. We both laughed. In the mornings, several volunteers have found a crescent-shaped imprint on the bedspread in the room they're pretty sure was the captain's. It looks like someone sat down right on the bed, Linda said. Some volunteers and visitors have reported seeing a man watching them from one of the windows, about halfway up the light tower, but nobody was in the tower at the time. Probably the eeriest of Linda's stories was told to her by one of the guests. A woman was visiting the lighthouse sometime last year, and when she pulled in, she noticed a man wearing a heavy blue coat walking across the yard to the lighthouse. Being friendly, she waved. He ignored her, but she didn't think that much of it. Like me, she went to the gift shop first, then went over to the lighthouse, looked around, and headed on her way. When she got home, the woman started doing some research on the lighthouse's history and realised that the man she'd seen in the yard was Captain Townsend. She contacted the lighthouse staff to tell them about her unusual encounter. Several people have seen a man wandering the grounds before, Linda told me, but this was the first time someone positively identified the captain, even though they didn't know who it was at the time. If you ever pay a visit to Michigan, consider paying a visit to the Seashore Lighthouse. Who knows? You might just get a glimpse of Captain Townsend for yourself. As are most things associated with the American Civil War, the haunted Sachs Bridge in Gettysburg is yet another on the long list of haunted structures found in Pennsylvania. Used by both Confederate and Union forces during the Battle of Gettysburg, the Sachs Bridge served as the execution site for at least 3 Southern soldiers, providing the backdrop for the otherworldly activity said to take place there. While many of the haunted locations throughout Gettysburg get plenty of attention, the Sachs Covered Bridge has become an icon and hotspot for otherworldly sightings and paranormal encounters. Its captivating beauty further draws outsiders to experience its mysterious charm. In the daylight, the bridge is truly a picturesque scene with stunning streams of water and elegant wooden construction. Once under the cover of night, however, the atmosphere quickly changes to a rather frightening setting. So often do ghostly activities occur here that it has garnered the attention of many popular paranormal investigators and television series. Many witnesses have come forward to report the sighting of 3 disembodied heads floating on the bridge. Under the dim moonlight, their pictures have captured what appears to be the ghostly apparitions of the 3 Confederate soldiers. Legend has it that the 3 Confederate soldiers were hung from Sachs Covered Bridge during the American Civil War. Many visitors have claimed to see full-bodied apparitions of the soldiers, experienced strange touching and hair-pulling, and heard eerie voices. There are 2 theories as to why the soldiers were hung. The first being that 3 Confederate soldiers deserted their unit and were caught. Their punishment, hanging from the Sachs Covered Bridge. The other theory suggests that the 3 soldiers were actually spies who were caught and subsequently hung from the bridge. The strong scent of cigar smoke has also been detected by guests, as if a soldier or general from years ago still patrols the area. Visitors have also been rattled by a tap on their shoulder, only to find when they turn around that there's absolutely nobody there. The sound of distant gunfire can often be heard when on the bridge at night. You could easily argue that the sound of gunfire be attributed by someone hunting in the nearby woods, if it wasn't for the fact that those same gunshots are often accompanied by cannon fire and screams of anguish. Throughout Gettysburg, tourists and lovers of the paranormal will find many locations to satiate their curiosities, but none are quite as astonishing as the Sachs Covered Bridge in Gettysburg. Its beauty is only matched by its horror. Preserved for nearly 200 years, this haunted crossing stands as a historical reminder of life during the late 19th century and the many brave soldiers who used it during the Battle of Gettysburg. The Tybee Island Lighthouse stands as a physical reminder of Georgia's deep-rooted history going back 2 centuries. Much of it is filled with tragedy after enduring 2 major wars and an endless onslaught of natural devastation. For this reason, many believe the Tybee Island Lighthouse also serves as a reminder of the spirits that have stayed behind. Located on Tybee Island, Georgia, the lighthouse towers as a beacon of the state's centuries-old history that has fascinated many over the decades. It's also proof to some of just how haunted the state really is, with chilling ghost stories reaching its boundaries. From strange happenings to eerie figures, the Tybee Island Lighthouse has left many visitors believing it's also a beacon for the dead. The Tybee Island Lighthouse predates much of Georgia's official history, with its completion in 1736 under the orders of General James Oglethorpe. It has since undergone a tempest of changes before becoming the beloved historical landmark it is today. It had only been standing for 5 years before it was severely damaged by a storm in 1741. 1 year later, it was rebuilt by Thomas Sumner, only this time using wood and stone. A period of serenity followed as the lighthouse towered over Tybee Island with a tall flagpole in an era before electricity. The lighthouse was necessarily rebuilt again in 1773, however, after it was damaged by encroaching tides and erosion. Sturdy bricks were used along with the installation of wooden stairs and landings. This very same base remains intact in the lighthouse that stands today. A second tower was added about 1,000 feet from the lighthouse's current site in 1822. The Civil War brought another period of reconstruction for the lighthouse in 1866, after it was burned by Confederate forces several years prior. However, it was halted when a cholera outbreak ravaged the area. The lighthouse stood upon the first 60 feet of the pre-existing tower, making it stand at its current height of 145 feet by the time construction was finished. More upgrades and restoration attempts were made over the years, with the biggest taking place in 1999 under the supervision of the Tybee Island Historical Society. Its signature black, white, black daymark was added in 2002 under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. The Tybee Island Lighthouse remains a treasure trove of untold stories in Georgia's history. It's also believed to be a keeper of secrets in the darkness it has witnessed in its nearly 300-year lifespan. These secrets have given rise to a slew of unusual happenings experienced by staff and visitors over the years. Perhaps one of the most disturbing details of the hauntings is their partial connection to children. Visitors have reported their electronic equipment malfunctioning when they visit the children's room on the second floor of what used to be the keeper's house. Visitors have also seen the apparition of a 5-year-old girl named Lachlan. Believed to be the daughter of the first keeper, Lachlan is known to appear to visitors on the winding staircase with a grim message: "Turn back, or be cursed." It seems like a pretty easy option. A visiting psychic also claimed to have seen the spirits of 2 children playing jump rope in the yard. Some of the former staff also seem to have no intention of leaving the lighthouse, even after death. The same psychic saw a man dressed as a lightkeeper standing in front of the lighthouse. Additionally, a staff member reported seeing the apparition of a man in the first assistant keeper's house while hearing constant footsteps. Many believe that the spirits of shipwreck victims also haunt the lighthouse grounds. The exact details of how this legend has come about remains unclear. A number of guests have reported seeing dead bodies floating in the waters nearby, however. Perhaps the darkest secret that dwells within the Tybee Island Lighthouse is what really happened in 1887. The lighthouse's head keeper, George Shaw, tragically died, but many were convinced it wasn't exactly natural. In fact, some believe his assistant murdered him. Shaw's ghost has since been experienced by visitors and staff in a number of ways, especially in his former house. Footsteps and a whistling tune can be heard, only to find out that there is no one there. The front door is also said to make an eerie sound, as if someone is trying to open it. Today, the Tybee Island Lighthouse doesn't just stand as a witness to the ebb and flow of time, but as a testament to the true spirit of resiliency. Located on St. Simon's Island and overlooking the St. Simon's Sound, the 19th century structure reaches 104 feet high and looms over the nearby Keeper's Duplex. Born from the rubble of a casualty of war, the building can be viewed as a symbol of hope and perseverance. That is, until you start to dig into the history of St. Simon's Island Lighthouse. Blemished by murder and unexpected death, there's a lingering heaviness that taints the tower. While learning of its complicated century-long past in the museum, expect to feel the presence of someone reaching out to you from afar and keeping your ears peeled for faint, disembodied footsteps. If any negative energy lingers, it's tied to the death of Frederick Osborne, former worker at the lighthouse and alleged murder victim. Summoned to oversee lighthouse operations in 1874, John Stevens accompanied Osborne and the pair worked together for 6 years. Details about what unfolded in 1880 remains unclear, though some accounts claim either Stevens or Osborne made a pass at the other's wife. Whatever led to the feud between the two was enough to warrant the assistant shooting of the lighthouse keeper. Osborne was dead, and quite unceremoniously, George W. Asbell took over in his absence. Though Stevens is still often blamed for Osborne's death, he was acquitted of all charges. The lack of justice could be keeping the former keeper tied to his post, forever stuck in a loop of manning the tower. For nearly 30 years after Osborne's untimely demise, whispers and rumours of strange occurrences plaguing the lighthouse were aplenty. They remained little more than scary stories told by each keeper until 1908, when a documented account revealed that Osborne never truly left St. Simon's Island. During one quiet night, a lighthouse mechanism failed and needed attention. At the time, only the wife of the then current lighthouse keeper, thought to be either Carl O. Svensson or Joseph Champagne, if the date is off by a year, was on the grounds. Though she knew a lot about the equipment, she was exasperated when she couldn't find the malfunction. Recalling back to a conversation with Frederick Osborne, in which he promised to provide help when she was in need, she called out to the deceased keeper. According to the report, the wife fainted at the sight of Osborne tinkering with the machinery, and when she awoke, it was as if the malfunction never happened. Is it Osborne that museum visitors hear today, clanking up and down the 129-step spiral staircase? Shadows flitter in the peripheral, chills wash over museum guests, and voices can often be heard coming from no known source. It seems, with the apparitions that remain attached to the lighthouse, that a keeper's work is never truly done. Point Lookout in Scotland, St Mary's County, Maryland, is probably the most haunted area in the state. The Point Lookout Lighthouse has been called by some the most haunted lighthouse in the United States. One of the most frequent ghost sightings at Point Lookout is a man in Civil War era clothing. He is seen moving across the road, away from what was once the smallpox unit. The gaunt ghost shambles across the road, reeking of mildew and gunpowder, wearing ragged, homespun clothes. It has been postulated that he is perhaps the ghost of a Confederate prisoner who feigned illness hoping to escape. But as his ghost runs across the road repeatedly, it is doubtful that he succeeded in his attempt to escape. This forlorn apparition seems not to notice the living, but perseveres on his eternal path towards an elusive freedom. A lighthouse has stood at Point Lookout to protect ships with its beacon since 1830. Beginning as a 1.5-story house, the building has been extended over the years. Now, an automatic offshore light has rendered the old lighthouse obsolete. Point Lookout Lighthouse, restored to how it looked in 1927, now stands much closer to the shoreline due to erosion caused by shifting currents and storms. Numerous paranormal investigators have visited the house in an attempt to gauge paranormal activity. The Point Lookout Lighthouse has been featured in the TV shows Weird Travels and Mystery Hunter. The strange activity has also been highlighted on TLC's series Haunted Lighthouses. In 1980, Han Holzer, the famous pioneer paranormal researcher, and his team conducted an investigation using electric voice phenomena at the Point Lookout Lighthouse. They recorded 24 different sounds and voices in and around the lighthouse. Another group held a séance and conjured up the spectral image of a Confederate soldier. In the 1970s, Gerald Sword reported seeing the movement of strange lights inside the house. He heard the murmur of voices, the sounds of doors being opened and closed, and footsteps in the hall, all while he was alone in the haunted building. Point Lookout Lighthouse is also known for strange and unpleasant odours emanating from several areas of the house, as well as for cold spots. People claim to hear the ghostly sound of moaning, as well as the sound of men, or a man snoring. Anne Davis, the wife of the first lighthouse keeper, maintained the Point Lookout Lighthouse for many years after her husband's death. In a famous photograph, the ghost of Anne Davis appears at the top of a stairway in a long blue skirt and a white blouse. She stayed on at the lighthouse until her death, when she was found laying in the lantern room, having died while performing her routine tasks. One of the sounds heard in the lighthouse is a soft female voice saying, "This is my house." It seems as if the dedicated lighthouse keeper prefers to haunt Point Lookout rather than moving on. Laura Berg, an employee of the state of Maryland who lived at the lighthouse in the 1970s, had several paranormal experiences while she was there. She accepted the hauntings and claimed that she did not feel threatened by what she felt were benign presences. In a shocking photograph, Laura appears holding a candle, but just behind her stands the spectral image of a bedraggled Civil War era soldier. She claims to have heard the sound of heavy boots clumping along the floorboards at night. She also heard a female voice singing merrily, as well as the sounds of ghostly men chatting and laughing. On one occasion, the mother of one of her guests heard a ghostly voice calling her name, Helen. But the most remarkable paranormal occurrence was when a spirit, angel, or ghost saved Laura's life. Laura was awakened one night to see a strange configuration of lights dancing over her bed. She then smelled smoke and ran downstairs to find that a space heater had caught fire. Perhaps the ghost of Anne Davis, in her dedication to the lighthouse, warned Berg, protecting her and her much beloved lighthouse.